Today we're going to solder up our binary clock kit. This is a pretty simple kit to do. Should take us probably about 10 minutes to finish. Of course, if you're doing this the first time, it'll probably take you a bit longer. No problem at all. To start out, we will probably pick the smallest parts and the lowest parts. That's usually the best way to do it. So the small resistors, they're the flattest on the board. So they're about the easiest to start with because they won't get in the way of other parts. And then we'll do the LEDs, and then we'll finish with the buzzer and the switch. So your kit should be ready to use. Try not to mix up your LEDs because they look all the same even though they are different colors. So look at your bill of materials to know which LED is which. And we'll just kind of randomly pick the first resistor from our bill of materials, which is the 499 ohm. There's a whole bunch of them, and that's in this middle section. So I'm just going to close up this. You can see that we've already pre-tinned a few of the locations, just so you don't have to sit here and watch us do all of these solder locations. Because we've done a lot of boards, we're going to go and start with tinning all of the locations just to get that step out of the way. So we're going to zoom in and start that process first. If you need a full tutorial on surface mount soldering, we do suggest you look at our general surface mount soldering video, and that'll give you some more step-by-step instructions on soldering individual parts and the strategy that we use when we're just soldering with a basic soldering iron that you've probably got at home. So let's get going here. Okay, so our 499 ohm resistors, those are most of the resistors that are on here. They're for all of the LEDs. So they're all in this section. They're in order. Start R1 there, all the way down through R12 there. So with any surface mount part, what we want to do is get a blob of solder on one side of our component. So like I said, I'm just doing all of these at once. Going through. You'll notice that the board does rock a bit, of course, on the bottom parts that are machine populated for us. So you just have to manage it. You got to do it with a finger or just with the pressure of an iron to help you work with how that's going to rock back and forth. It's a little bit irritating, but that's kind of often what you face. It doesn't matter which one we start. Since we're right-handed, we like to work this way, so we're going to start up here. So with each component, grab the part, and here we're going to probably use our finger to anchor down the part that we're going to use. Put on our soldering iron, heat up that blob of solder, slide the part in, watch it cover onto the part, and just position the part. Let that go. So there's one, and we're going to go through and do all of these. So wherever go nice and slow. Again, always I hold the board down, put the soldering iron in, melt the soldering or the solder, bring the part in, move it, take the iron away, give it a second. They're big pads and they're big parts, so it'll take you a second or two for the solder to melt each time. You just want to make sure that you have a nice stable board each time you put the part on. And of course I'm looking to see that each of the parts is positioned correctly as I'm doing it. And this one is actually a bit crooked, so go in. If you want to change it, grab the part, move back in. Kind of doing this from a side angle so I don't get in the way. Doesn't matter which way the resistors go. If you're really particular, then you can put the labels all the same way. But it's not that big of a deal, so we're not going to worry about it too much. My parts, by the way, are just in a little pile just at the top of the board outside the frame of the video. So I've removed them from the case, but all of the other parts in the case are still in the case. Okay, 5 left. Of course, only one side of these resistors is tacked down right now. if you're new to surface mount soldering, you might want to work on each one of these individually, but we like to do it this way for the sake of speed. Actually start this one over here. I always like to work in a way that you won't, or you'll minimize getting in the way of yourself later on. So in this case I should really just work right to left, depending on how you hold your soldering iron. That might be different for different people. These pads are also generously oversized, so it's pretty straightforward to solder this board together. Alright, so those are all of the parts in that particular family, or I guess value, populated. So now we're going to go through and we're going to populate or solder it on the other side. So I'm going to bring my iron in, touch the, make sure it's nice and clean, kind of touch the pad on the part, dip my solder in there, watch it flow down. Be nice and patient. You want to make sure you get good solder flow there. We're not going to worry too much about getting too much solder on there. I'd rather have you with too much solder than not enough solder. Just flip this around to make it easier. Come in from behind the part like this, it's actually a nice way to make sure that you are contacting the part. We're using very, very gentle pressure against the part and slightly down to the board, making sure, of course, that our solder flows onto the pad and onto the part. And that's it. Now, because these are really big parts, I can see that these joints are quite good. If the solder quality doesn't look very good on the other joints that you did initially, you are sliding a part into a joint, which is not the best way to make a connection. So you might just want to go back and either just touch your iron to it, maybe bring in a bit more solder in. If you're concerned that you have too much solder with your clean iron, you can usually just kind of do a little wiping motion like this, and it'll pull off a bit of the solder, make the joint look a bit better. But we're not too concerned about that kind of stuff. So that's all we'll do for there. Okay, so that is all of the first resistor from the kit. And now we can do these other three. You might as well do all the resistors. So that's the 100K resistors. They're in compartment C. So we'll dump those out, making sure not to lose our LEDs or our buzzer. So those are ready to go. We've already soldered those pads in place, or the first part of the pad. Of course, resistors are always the wrong way down. Doesn't really matter, you could put them backwards if you wanted to, but that really wouldn't look any good. It's nice to be able to read the values. So come in here, same thing, slide your parts in. Hear us tapping on the paper there. That's usually a good way to flip components over. All the big 1206 components are pretty easy just to flip manually. Okay, so there's those three. First part, turn the board, do the second part. Actually, let's turn it this way. So again, we can go from behind, heat the pad, heat the part. Sorry, I probably did that one out of frame. If you're really having trouble with this board, you can actually stick it on a piece of cloth or foam or something like that, and just to give it a bit of friction and something to sit into, and then it won't move around on you too much. Alright, so those are all of the resistors done, and now we can do the LEDs. So The resistors were not polarized, didn't have to worry about that. LEDs are polarized. You'll see in all of these LED marks, there's little ears, little white flags. All of them are here on this row. They're on the top row. They're right there on those guys. So that's the cathode mark for the LEDs. So when we put these on, you want to make sure that we get those in the right spot. We're going to finish doing our solder blobs. Okay, you can see these are huge pads, right? So it takes a bit of time to heat them up and put the solder blob on. But do all those. You notice that I always blob on the same side. So in this particular case, I'm doing all the top positions. Okay. So that way, when I turn the board, I don't have to be worrying about moving back and forth. Let's do the order, let's do them from bottom to the top. So these ones here are the green LEDs, and they are in case C. So if you open case C, you'll see that there are 2 LEDs in there. Okay. And again, be careful if you drop this on the board. So our cathode mark is here, and hopefully you can see, certainly on your part, there's a little chamfer there, and that's the cathode mark in for this LED. So make sure that is matching up with the mark on the board. Okay. This board also accommodates through-hole parts if you wanted to do that. This is a surface mount kit, so that's why there are holes there if you're wondering, just kind of a dual purpose. So put this guy on, get it right in the middle. Okay, make sure it's straight. And again, we'll do the second side first. Again, looking at our cathode mark. Get it sort of in place there. Let's move this up a bit. Slide her in. Like so. And then come around to do the other sides. If you touch the white part of these LEDs, the white part will melt and it'll look kind of crappy. So do not, be very careful to not touch your LEDs there. Next part, we'll do the blue LEDs. They are in, actually no, we'll do the red LEDs. They are in case B. Get those ready. Okay, cathode mark also on the bottom on these ones, so make sure those are all correctly the right way. It's not the end of the world if you get this in the wrong spot. Get to practice some desoldering, but it's kind of a pain. So we'd like to make sure that, I'd like to try and get it right the first time. Make sure you take lots of time, be nice and patient, watch the solder flow up onto the part. If the part's not sitting flat, you'll see me sometimes just sort of drop it back onto the board. Always making little adjustments. See right there, I kind of rolled my soldering iron into position, or I can roll it backwards to move it back a bit. All these little tricks that you get after you've soldered 10,000 parts. I'm sure I soldered actually more than 10,000 parts. So eventually you get pretty used to this stuff. Last one for our reds. Of course, you're always welcome to order custom LED kits or get your own LEDs and change up the color for this board, but we kind of like blue and reds. That's why it comes standard. Do this side. These are nice and easy to do. You can see we dab some solder on there. I always kind of cheat and just touch the tip of the iron just to get it starting to melt. Speeds things up a bit. Always watch it. Get a little blob there, and I know that's enough solder. Give it a few seconds to melt down. Okay. But overall, of course, we don't want to spend too much time on the pads itself. Now in coming up to this, I realized I probably should have done the blues first because it's going to be slightly in the way, those parts there, just because of the way I'm doing it. So I often like to give myself some challenges. But in hindsight, should have done it the other way. Now be really careful here because just to be tricky, make sure you guys are paying attention. We flipped this orientation of this LED, so the cathode mark is at the top there. So flip that guy around. You can see I use my pinky to anchor the board. And we'll just get a nice position here that's comfortable for us. Try not to hit your resistor. Cathode mark is up. If you're ever soldering diodes or LEDs, remind yourself, check the cathode, check the cathode. I also try and make sure that these are straight amongst themselves with the large pads that we put on here. You could have this part puppet up there, you could have it down there, and that would look kind of funny. So as you're positioning the part, one of the things you should do is just make sure that you're even in relation to all of your other parts. You'll find that the tweezers actually fall into those little through holes. That's what was happening right there, so it makes it even more challenging. So you grab the part a bit higher, that won't happen. There we go. Just double checking the cathode marks. It's way easier to fix a part if there's only one terminal soldered. So if we wanted to change anything, and actually this LED there is a bit crooked, so let's fix that before we move on. Grab it first, reheat it, just put that back in place so it's a bit straighter. That's better. And we'll go through, again, be really careful here, not touching the other LEDs that you've already done, because you will melt them. They will probably still work, but they will look ugly. And that is all of our LEDs. Okay, so 4 little parts left. We've got our buzzer and our switches. So it doesn't really matter what order we do them in. The buzzer is sitting right here in this way. So this, again, you got a big pad here. You can see it takes a little while for that solder to flow. Okay, to make that blob, we can do our switches. Again, even with the switches, there are 4 terminal devices. But it doesn't matter how many terminals you have on a particular device, you only want to start with one location soldered. So I'll just do that one location for that blob on all of those. Buzzer doesn't really matter which way up or down. You probably want the text facing the right way. So you can get this right. It should drop in there just before it touches, so it's nice and flat on the board. Again, I'm going to find a way to anchor this down, get nice and comfy. Okay, grab it with my tweezers, then move my iron in here. Use the nice broad side of the iron like that. This will pick up the heat quite well. Slide it in. You can use the silkscreen marking to make sure that it's nice and straight. Give that a few seconds because it's a big lump of solder there. And as long as it's straight and you're happy with that, then you can come to the other side. Don't melt your LED. Get that in place there. I'm holding the board down with my fingers. I'm touching up against the pad and the part itself. Just give it a second to solder that down. Like so. And then we'll do the switches. These guys can only go on one way, don't have to worry about that. If you seem to have dexterity problems like I do, you can make this a longer process. Melt the pads, slide it on. Again, you're looking to center the part all the pins in the pads. Straighten that out a bit. Straighten that out a bit more. Okay, so that's all centered. Next guy. If I do version 2 of this video, I am going to get a piece of cloth or something because it is sort of irritating to have this sliding around like this. Stuff like that is just irritating, but part of life. There's the parts stick. You got a big heat sink here of this part. So when you touch the part, it actually cools the solder. Makes it a bit tricky. And with all those in place, just double check that they're good to go. And here you can push down on the top of the pin there and just touch your solder in, and that will heat through the pin down onto the pad. Takes it a while. This one is a ground connection. You can see it's got 4 solder leads to the ground plane, so that'll pull a lot of heat. We'll actually use the side spot here. Get a bit more heat a bit faster. When you're doing the second connection, be careful you don't push too much on the part because it can still pivot against the single connection that you've got there. So you can stress that connection a bit, so you want to make sure that you don't do that. And there is our last one. Okay. So that's it. That is how you solder this board together. Once you have checked your joints, you can look through with a loupe and make sure everything is good to go. You don't need to put the battery in yet. The battery is just for backup. It won't run the clock in a display mode. It only runs it in, it keeps the time for you and it keeps the alarm function active, but it doesn't turn on the display because that'll just kill that coin cell in no time. But you can take your USB power, plug it in here, and what you should see is the lights light up for the set mode, and then you can go through and set that and make it run. So there's our seconds going. We can advance to set our time. We can go to our minutes. Sorry, I don't know how to use my own clock. Here, let's set these. Turn them all on. I guess they won't all go on because there's only 12, but you can see that they are all working. Minutes, same sort of thing. But let's check, go through all of them, make sure all of our LEDs work. So you can see that we've definitely got all of our LEDs working. So this will eventually reset. If you want to do this time really quickly, you've got 32 plus 16 is 48, plus 8, so that's 56. So this is, and that's 3, so that's 3:56 is what this is currently set to, 3:56 p.m., and our 1 second blink is on there. So another way to test that your binary knowledge is up to date. Again, we can advance that. So that would be 8 o'clock. That would be 10 o'clock, etc. If you wrap through, you can see that the AM PM light goes off there. That's 2:56 or whatever we calculated there. So you can get really good in figuring out how this time works. So that's 1, 2, 4, and 8, and this is 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and 32. That's how those all add up there. So have lots of fun with that, and hope that you enjoyed doing this kit. Thanks very much, and have a great day.